Zout is a very impressive game, and it does one thing differently than a lot of Amiga games. Super Frog and Body Blows, for example, are known to scroll at 50 frames per second, but then to have the enemies and the objects at 25 frames per second. But Zout flips that on its head and has the scrolling at 25 frames per second and everything else at 50 frames per second. And I think you're going to be amazed later on how big some of the objects are that move at 50 frames per second. So to show you what I mean, right now I'll go frame to frame and pay attention to this edge of the screen for the scrolling. So frame, 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 frame. So yeah, every other frame, the whole screen scrolls. And now take a look at all these other objects, and I'll do it frame by frame again. Frame, 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 frame. So they all move at 50 frames per second. So the visible area is 303 by 221. Sometimes the debugger doubles the horizontal resolution. So yeah, it's really 303 by 221. And the colors, right now, 50 colors. So it's a 32 color, 5-bit plane game, at least in the main area. The HUD is just 3-bit planes, 8 colors, but then they also copperize some of the colors. You can see that here in the copper visualizers. So you've got color 1 that changes down the HUD. So that's for all these numbers and stuff. And then color 7, which changes down the HUD, and that's the purples for the 1-up and the 2-up, because it can be a 2-player simultaneous game. So here's the bit planes, bit plane 0, 1, and 2. And at this point, you'll notice that the HUD is finished because it's just the 3-bit planes. And then bit plane 3 and 4 make up the 5-bit planes of the main area. I have cheats on so I can show you all the ship attachments are sprites. Sprite 0 and Sprite 1 attached 15 color, and then Sprite 2 and Sprite 3 attached, and then Sprite 4 and Sprite 5 attached are this drone here. I haven't played a lot in 2-player, but I think that in 2-player you don't have this, because in 2-player mode you only have the 8 sprites, so you don't have these two. So it's everything here is just these 4, and then player 2 would just replicate Sprite 0 to 3 here. Sprite 4 and 5 are the same thing as Sprite 0 and 1 here, and Sprite 6 and 7 are the same as Sprite 2 and 3 here. So since the game would be presumably easier with 2 players, you don't have the shield at the front, I don't think. Let me know if I'm wrong about that. If we put the Blitter visualizer on, you can see that all the shots and all the enemies are being blit, and your player shots are also blits. Here's the first of some of the big object blits. If I take the Blitter visualizer off and do it frame by frame, like right here, so frame, 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 50 frames per second. And we now get into some really big blits. Look at these guys. One thing they've done here, I think, let me just pause it for a sec, is that they've simplified the background, so you don't have to restore the whole complicated background that's here. That should help speed things up. If I go to where it maxes out and you have the most of them on screen, and then I pause it right about here, if I go frame by frame, you'll see that every movable one moves every single frame. So frame, 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 frame. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 huge blits all moving at 50 frames per second. This big boss also moves at 50 frames per second with the full background, but there's no scrolling right there. This second level is interesting because they do some palette changes for the background. So you can see that right here and right here. So the vines at the top are this greeny blue color, and the vines at the bottom are the browny gray. So that's these and these. And because there's some vertical scrolling in the game, if you look at the copper visualizer and you look right here, when you move up and down, this moves with you, and this is the color change. So if I pause it here, it's changing color 8, color 9, color 10, and color 15 to the gray-brown colors of the bottom vines. And look how many enemies are on screen right now. There's 16 of these green guys, and again, frame, 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 frame. They move at 50 frames per second. So get used to me saying that. And right here is very cool. At first I thought that those clouds, they were parallaxing with maybe dual playfield or sprites or something like that. But if we approach them again with the Blitter visualizer on, you'll see that they're just blits. So that's a clever way of having some sort of parallax motion just using the Blitter. This level has some nice topper sky gradients that we can see in the palette visualizer. So it does all the gradients here and also changes the palette of this color. If I put the copper block on and go up to the top, you can see how boring the level would look without the copper gradients. But when you slide this down, you get the nice pink sky and the nice blue water. And in the copper visualizer, you'll see when I scroll down and when I scroll up, the entire copper list moves with me. Here's another impressive area. You've got these three big green laser beams and all these rockets coming at you, again in 50 frames per second. Frame, 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 frame. And check this sequence out. Look at how the copper sky is receding in the background. We did it a bit there, and then more there. So let's watch it happen in the copper visualizer. Right now, this color 7 is 0703, and if I play it, watch it change. 0603 all the way to black, 0000. I know a lot of people really like this level of the game. It's H.R. Geiger influenced. Macaw 45, the streamer, really likes it. And this water effect is cool. So let's see how they do that. Let me pause it. So you can see it changes a lot of the palette right below this line. So you can see that really well here with the copper visualizer. All the palette is being changed on this line. And then these are moving up and down. So let's see what those are if I pause it. So these are the BPL Con 1 bitplane playfield horizontal scroll values. And they change here and here and here and here. So the effect they have, you can see right here is kind of like a little ripple. So it looks like little ripples going through the water. And then you have these pods that go up and down. And if you combine it with the creature's tongue coming out, again, watch how all the pods move with the full background and the tongues coming out all at the same time, 50 frames per second, frame, 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 frame. So for the final level, they really switch things up screen-wise, and they have some parallax and everything. So let's take a look how they did this. First of all, the star background is done with sprites. So if you take the sprites off, you lose that. And it's sprite number 7 that's vertically multiplexed. But that got me thinking about what happens if you have two players and sprite 7 is being used for the ship. I couldn't find a long play of two players, so I actually went through with two players and skipped each level. Took a while, but what I discovered is that in two-player mode, there is no star background. It's just a black background because they don't have that extra sprite. So that was very interesting. And if you look at the palette visualizer, you'll see some differences too for this level. Namely that right here, it switches to 4-bit planes 16 colors instead of 5-bit planes 32 colors up here. So right here is just 4-bit planes. But that's essentially a separate screen. So your player and the shots and everything won't interact with this area. So the playable area sort of just becomes from here to the top. You can see that here. So if I go down, my attachment disappears and I can't move down any farther, my ship. And these things, when they fall, they disappear right here and don't go down any farther. And this massive ship, you might think, is with huge blits, but it's really just the level map itself scrolling. If you put the Blitter visualizer on, you can see that it's not being blit, just these drops are being blit. And then just the arm is being blit, and then these spikes over here being blit, and then the tiles are actually coming in here from the left. Now this whole sequence is quite interesting. These guys come from the top, and then the saw part comes over here. So if we watch it with the Blitter visualizer, these guys are blits, but this is just the map being tiled in, and then this is a blit. So you can tell that like before, because these two that are blits are going to move at 50 frames per second, and this just being the level map will be 25 frames a second. So frame, 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 frame. But then this is interesting. Watch when this whole part jumps. It's still not a blit. It looks like the level map still, and I think it is. But when it jumps here, if I go frame by frame, 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 then this whole part is moving at 50 frames per second now. So the level map is now scrolling at 50 frames per second instead of 25. And once these guys up here that are blits get in sync with this part, the entire thing and this shot all move at 50 frames per second. So frame, 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 frame. So I guess they were able to do this because it's a smaller screen and it really stops right here. Then you've got all these huge missiles that come in that are being blit, and then the level map thing is moving down at the bottom, and all of it is moving at 50 frames per second. Frames, 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 frame. And don't forget that also includes the 3 slices of 4-bit plane parallax down here that is being done by changing the bit plane pointers here, here, and here. So those also move every frame, here, 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 here. Here's the final boss with the Blitter visualizer going. So it's got his mouth and the arms and the shots and the bugs being blit. And for the final time, I'll say everything on screen is 50 frames per second right here. So frame, 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 frame. All very, very impressive stuff. And it even translates into the end credits here. If you put the palette visualizer on along with the copper visualizer, you can see that it's a 5-bit plane screen. So he's changed all these colors over here with the copper, I think doing a midline swaps. So it's color 16, color 17, color 18. The individual color stays the same as it goes down, but each consecutive color changes. So if you see this green here that takes up most of the second half of the palette, that's just for the letters, and the letters are actually only on bit plane 4. So if I hit that, they go off, and if I take all the bit planes and I just put bit plane 4, there's just the letters. But with all 5-bit planes on, I think he did all of that in the copper just for this little effect. So when the letters come on, they're masked out in certain areas by the other colors, and it's only when the full green emerges in the second half of the palette that the letters are all just green. So you can see it a bit here. If I go frame by frame, you see how it just comes on, and then eventually, once it gets high enough, it's got the full letters right there. So that would correspond to the tops right here, and then it's fully green up in this area. So Tobias Binsack, who was the programmer, was a genius. This was late 1990. Very, very impressive. And the big question is, what happened to Tobias Binsack? I hope he's still with us. But when I checked his Moby Games credits, he didn't do anything after Z-Out. So if anyone knows what happened with him, please let me know in the comments. He really created a technical masterpiece, so thank you. And thank you guys for watching. I always appreciate it. Please like and subscribe and comment if you haven't. Put the notification bell on if you'd like to be instantly notified of new videos. So thank you again. Take care.